Is from New Zealand here, is that right? Kia ora. Love to see you. I love my chances to practice my languages. Also live there. What's that, mate? Okay. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. When you hear those words spoken, do you feel confident or not? If you see somebody with that and they say it, what do you think? Perhaps a little bit more confidence with that? I remember going through a bit of a grumpy stage. When I saw these plates on cars, I'd think, oh goodness, got to watch out. Then I've discovered that with things like entitlement and arrogance and mobile phones, gosh, it's everybody now. Almost very hard to know whether you can trust them or not. So I guess it kind of depends on who's saying it, in what circumstances, that you might wonder just what's actually happening, where it's working great. And then you might think, what about when? In other words, you'll come up with situations where the trust you thought you had in somebody or in something maybe not quite so strong anymore. Let me illustrate trust in a few different ways. Some of you know this particular story of Charles Blondin. His name was apparently Charles or Jean-François Gravelet, Frenchman, but he changed his name to match the coach, the trainer that he had. When he was very young, he decided he wanted to start being a gymnast. And then soon after that, he started doing tightrope walking. Now, I find it's quite an amazing thing, because for a person to stay on a tightrope that long is just simply amazing. Just a few more details. The Niagara Falls, for which he was mostly known for, about a 400-plus meter long rope, all made of hemp. That's a long distance, right? And he'd done it about 300 times, as well as being in other countries like Japan and England and other places. But they calculated he probably did about 16,000 kilometers on rope over his lifetime. Would you say you start to trust him? Like he knew what he was doing? Right? Apparently one time, Harry Colcord, his manager, Charles invited him to hop on his back. Bless Harry, he got on Charles's back and went right across. But the other story I'm aware of, and I'll just show you this one here again, apparently there was one time, and I couldn't quite find it on the net, but I'm sure it was there because I trust the story, is that apparently one time Charles had gone across with a wheelbarrow, and this guy came up and he was just so expressive to Charles, how much he admired him, etc., how he believed he could do it, and just so awesome. And Charles simply said, "Get in." Something happens when life says, "Get in." You might think you trusted it, or the person, or the event, or the machine, like me with my little old car, and then suddenly find, oh, that's a bit of a challenge. Just go back to that. So, and I do believe the man got in, but also the picture shows you a young lady in there. There's also times apparently when Charles had both a male and a child on his back. He also used stilts on the tightrope walk and would do somersaults with stilts, for goodness sake. He would do it backwards. He would do it with a bag over his head. I can imagine that being the very first time, because he'd be too afraid to see what's going on. But he obviously proved that when it comes to tightrope walking, he could honestly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." And people even trusted their lives to him, which I just find is absolutely incredible. Now, just to illustrate, trust is not just a leap of faith. Yes, I love this. I had to find some excuse to use it. Trust is not just hoping for something. And I hope before we finish our service this morning, you'll pick that up with me. There's a number of reasons. I'll come back to the reasons why I'm taking this particular theme with you today. I'm suggesting to you that there are two factors in trust. There are the known and the unknown. And sometimes we use the word trust or faith in a spiritual way more to do with the unknown, as if you have more faith if you believe in the unknown than somebody else who's looking more for reasons. I would submit to you this morning, folks, that trust has these two factors in them. In fact, and that trust is first of all based on the things that we know, and then it takes us into the unknown. Does that seem reasonable enough to you? I remember when I took the lesson first time the second Sabbath, I think, of January, we talked a bit about this too, as far as what Daniel is offering to us through his book, or God through the book of Daniel. Let me another little fun story here. Now, that's me about to turn 50, and my daughter Corrie, who has just turned 21. And she didn't use the term, trust me, I know what I'm doing. She just said to me, Dad, what do you reckon? To celebrate our birthdays, how about we jump from an aeroplane? And those of you who know me, that's not a big issue. Yeah, sounds great. Let's go and do it. Anything sounds worth an adventure. So the other photographs there are just simply the location and the preparation for it, etc., and then the plane. But I've said to many, many people over the times that I've jumped from an aeroplane several times. And mostly, guess what answer I usually get?
Why would you jump from a perfectly good aeroplane?
You've heard that expression, or we may have even said it to people, right? Why would you want to jump from a perfectly good aeroplane? The standard answer to that is, there's no such thing as a perfectly good aeroplane. But the fact that my daughter's enthusiasm, the fact that she said it, was probably enough for me as dad, because I adore my kids, all four of them, and Corrie's just a wonderful person. And so probably the fact that she actually invited me is probably what got me started. But then 7 years later, my younger daughter was about to turn 21, and she had several friends lined up to jump with her, and they all piked out on the Friday night beforehand. And I said, well, sweetheart, you're not jumping on your own. So she, Dad, will you jump with me? Yeah, absolutely. So we jumped together, and then 2 years after that, my youngest son turned 21, and so we decided we'd shout him a parachute jump as well. But let me tell you one of the things that actually made this possible. That guy in the back there, I found out before I even jumped with him my very first time, well, first of four, he had jumped 7,000 times before. And he got up and walked away, went back to his family. The fourth time, when I jumped with my youngest son, the guy who was on the back of me then had jumped 10,000 times. He was going for a special award. Do you think they knew what they were doing? Folks, I can assure you, when I was actually pelting like a rate of knots from 15,000 feet, I was having the time of my life. I had no fear for some reason, going on the plane all the way up there, and certainly when we landed, when we took off and started screaming down, and the other guy on the parachute back then taking the photographs, they use armbands now, but back then another guy was jumping. We just had a blast. No fear, because my trust was, I think, pretty much implicit. It was full on. I had no question. He knew what he was doing, and he was not going to put himself at risk, since he's only a few inches away from the ground, and even if I landed first, he still wouldn't be in a very good place either. But I put this picture here also to show you that for some people, trust is not an easy thing. Notice down the bottom it says, you can never be too cautious. And I can appreciate that seriously, the fact that some things you take on very cautiously, but there is a place for trust in pretty much everything. Let me ask you collectively, how many people would have actually flown in a plane in this audience here? I expected that, the vast majority. Hands down. Now hands up if you're uncomfortable when you fly in a plane. Okay, a friend of mine called Brian, who I worked with for 5 years at the Auckland Adventist Hospital, he came from England across to New Zealand, and he never let go of the handrests for the whole 20 hours of flight. I never asked if he had to go to the toilet, because that'd be pretty hard to take the handrests with him. But Gillian, his wife, said, Jim, he just hung onto his fingers were white, the entire trip flying. So yes, he flew, and he did a pretty dramatic flight from England or from wherever right across to New Zealand, but he was uncomfortable the whole way. He did not trust the experience. And I guess if you have this next one, again, excuse to use it, but notice what the guy says. If I can see it somewhere, I'll read it for you. The captain says to the people, no, I can't read it on there. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for choosing to fly Mandarin Airlines. As we taxi out to the runway, please make yourself comfortable. And those of you who are sitting on the right-hand side of the plane, please look to your left. You can understand why. And for good reason. I guess the pilot couldn't control what happened on the actual runway there, but didn't want his people panicking for no reason. Because I guess the pilot himself would say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. Little list here, just to give you an illustration that I think is real. See if you come along with me. Pretty much every single thing you do involves an element of trust. Now, I'll put it on, first of all, light switch. I'm sure there'd be hands as well if I said, how many people have walked in with total confidence every time you walk into the bedroom or wherever, you flick the switch and you walk into a lightened room. And all of a sudden one day you come in fully expecting, you flick the switch and you walk into a darkened room. Something didn't happen right. Is that fair? Again, like the button and the key on my old FJ Holden, it didn't always work. If I'd really thought about it, it worked on dry nights, not on wet nights. You know, you think it would slowly sort of grow on me after a while. But my point is that even something as simple as light switches, or lights rather, globes have been proven not to be totally reliable. And it probably depends on who your friends are, but you might also confidently sit on a chair without even thinking about it. Just mark in, plonk yourself down. And then suddenly discover what? One day the chair goes, or one of your friends has orchestrated in some way. Driving in a taxi. I was lucky enough to go to Bali last year, and talking to the taxi driver who was a Cambodian, we got so talking that he forgot to turn off to the airport. We had to go over the Great Way Bridge to some point, do a U and come back again to get to the airport on time. On the way back, another taxi driving along. We got so involved in his conversation too, he didn't turn off. We went over the Hornybrook Bridge for a nice little drive extra. Right? Now, I don't put that as a problem. I think it was quite fun. But even I've heard stories sometimes where people say, I'm sure the taxi driver took me a long way around. You've heard that kind of a story as well? Okay, so even something like that. Going to a restaurant. Have ever you been to something like a cafe or a restaurant and discovered you didn't quite get what you ordered? Or it didn't quite taste right? Or something wasn't quite the way you expected, right? As simple as going to a restaurant. You still expect that the person who's doing the cooking is making what you ordered. And probably in the way that you ordered it, depending on what you order thing. Relationships particularly. Would I be fair in saying relationships are one of the biggest areas where we kind of have to test to see whether in fact the person is what they're claiming to be, or we feel right in their company, or whatever. And it could be just a relationship of romance. It could also be a relationship of business. But there's trust involved in all these everyday things. So no surprise, therefore, that following some kind of religious faith will also involve some level of trust. Like you know what's going to come next, and I'm not too sure either. Here we go. So I guess what I'm saying is, in the area of the known, these two different factors of trusting and having faith, the known and the unknown, generally speaking, if the known gives you a feeling of uncomfortableness, guess what? I never knew it did that. I've used this slide before. I didn't know it actually was a motivated one. But if you get enough discouragement from what you're learning about the person, or let's say you feel uncomfortable about the taxi driver, right? If you've been to some of the Asian countries, sometimes in Europe as well, you'll find you have to get into a bartering situation first of all to work out what kind of price you're going to agree to. And that's not always a pleasant experience, I've discovered. And so what I know about the person might be enough for me to say, no, thank you, I'll go somewhere else. And so what we know about something could actually discourage us enough to say, no, I know enough now not to go any further. Or it may, on the other hand, encourage us enough to say, yeah, this is worth taking another step, or a step of faith, a step of trust. Are you kind of getting where I'm coming from at the moment? And maybe you've already thought about this before. So when there are big questions that for us particularly, like I walked up the stairs this morning, my computer's busted, so I don't trust it anymore either. So I had to at 9 o'clock get to the library to quickly print off a couple of photos that I wanted in here and then print off the results. And a guy walking up behind me, we waited at the closed door for about 3 or 4 minutes, and I said I was getting ready for church service. He said, oh, I'm not a religious person of any shape or form. And that's fine. It means I'm left with bigger questions, or maybe not, because I believe I have very, very satisfying answers. So he might be left with some bigger questions about origins and meaning and purpose of life, etc. But some of these questions are really, really big. And I've had the privilege of sharing these with a lot of people, talking about these kind of things over many years, and I'm sure you have as well, and even thought about them yourself. Does God actually exist? Have you seen him? What kind of knowns do we have about God, and what kind of unknowns? A lot of unknowns. Is the Bible really divine? Did God speak the universe into existence? That's a big challenging one for a lot of people. Because I remember a couple of years ago, we were up on Pathfinder Camp out, and Archer, I think it was, somewhere up there. But we were surrounded by trees, which means, with not seeing the ambient lights of the city, and dark, dark night, I saw into the heavens further than I believe I've seen before. I felt like I was actually looking through space instead of just seeing that ceiling of stars. It was awesome. But it brought me to thinking, wow, God's bigger than I thought before. Because that's my answer for it. But for other people, did God really speak the universe into existence? That means a God that you and I have barely even begun to understand. He didn't just make this world. According to the scriptures, he made the universe. And if you were with me that night, you would have seen the universe disappear into oblivion. Who knows how far? And he made it all. That's a big trust question as well. Was human Jesus also God Jesus? There's a challenging question as well. Is Jesus really coming again? I personally have no question about that. I'm no longer in the same mindset as when I was a teenager, because I was told then I wouldn't see 21 before Jesus came back. And I'm getting close to that, I can assure you. So, but I do believe Jesus is coming again. If it's not in my time, I'll have a sleep while I'm waiting. Not a problem. Is eternal life possible? Have you actually thought about eternal life? What it looks and sounds like? You know, how many, what do they call it? Groundhog days kind of feeling, like every single day. If there is such a thing, a day and night, I have no idea. I think I've said to you from the front here before, as older I get, the more questions I have than answers, and I'm thrilled with that. I'm personally very, very content to not know all the answers of some of these things, like we talked about, what's heaven going to be like, because I think it is far beyond anything that we can possibly think or say, so let's not get too caught up in trying to define it. It's beyond thinking, beyond belief almost. But these are big questions, folks, that are important for us, especially if we're sharing with somebody else and where they want to come from. And so from the angle of trust, or we'll use the word faith a lot in our scriptures, both are used, by the way, very commonly, but faith is one we often refer to in a spiritual way. I'd like to give you two reasons why I'd like to have this theme, and if possible even come back to it. The first one, and I've got a few Bible references here, and I'm choosing to put them up myself, guys, because there are different versions here. But each of these are statements that Jesus has given from his word related to this theme of faith and trust. He says in Timothy, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. What I'm suggesting here this morning, folks, in the known part, there are things that we actually have responsibility. God doesn't just rock up and present himself. If we are questioning whether we have enough faith or not, etc., I'm suggesting to you from these words here that Jesus actually has given us a role as well. So he says here, we correctly handle the word of truth. Another one. All of it, talking about the scripture, which is God-breathed, all of it is useful for teaching and helping people and correcting them and showing them how to live. A very, very useful tool, very functional, very vital tool even for us. So therefore, our relationship with the Bible and our search for truth and our search for trust, for faith, is really, really important, as Jesus is suggesting there. And the benefits, Scripture reassures us, no one who trusts God like this, heart and soul, will ever regret it. Right? That's from the Message. Love the way he put it. There'll be no regrets. Now, I suspect if my parachute experience hadn't quite worked out, then I probably wouldn't be here talking to you, right? But after my first jump, I was so exhilarated that I got a cheap version from an auction sale at a church school program. And then, as I said, my third child and then my fourth child. I couldn't wait. If you would pay the bill, I would go every weekend. Happily. Right? That's the kind of thing that Jesus is saying here. If you delve into the Scripture and you learn how to handle it in the way we just talked about in Timothy, you will not regret it. And the last one I've got here for you, if you stick with this, which is living out what I tell you, you are my disciples for sure. Then you'll experience for yourselves the truth, and the truth will free you. Whatever that means. It could mean a different thing for each one of us here to be free, whether it's from a past, whether it's from an attitude, whether it's from some kind of, I guess the past covers a lot of things, doesn't it? From fear. The benefits of our journey in trust and faith are immeasurable. But I have another reason too, why I'm presenting to you. And I'm sure some of you have already read last week's record, have you? If not, I recommend it to you. But it's not actually great reading, really, because a friend of mine, Errol Webster, wrote an article, Why Are So Many Leaving the Church? Now, from my years in ministry, I already have had this kind of feeling, watching and people coming and going, etc. But also, more recently, have I still been aware of the fact that there's a lot of loss of membership, attendance, etc. Now, for some people, it's just moving to another congregation. For some, maybe moving to a different faith. But for many, it's moving out of faith. It's my perception that we as a church have just in the last few years started asking this question. We haven't been comfortable asking the question before. Because after all, we are the remnant church. We're God's church. We have the truth. All that kind of language. So therefore, to admit to ourselves that we have a large hemorrhaging of people leaving our church is an uncomfortable truth. So I give full credit to Jared, who I know personally, the editor, for okaying to have the article from Errol in here. I've also noticed the division president, a number of months ago, made comment about it. So it seems like we're actually saying, hey folks, we actually have a problem. It appears. And so the kind of thing I'm suggesting here to you is, and these are only three possible reasons why this exploring into and the challenge into having faith and Jesus encouraging us and giving us great promises to hang on in faith doesn't seem to be enough for some people. When you know that we're losing between 40 and 50% of our membership over time, that is an awful figure. Papua New Guinea, we have 300,000 some members up there. And someone said to me, we'd lose around 65% when they come in through one particular event. Some 60-odd% within a year or two have already left. Folks, there's something not right about that in my book, all right? Something not right. When this not simple, but this journey of moving into faith and faith in Jesus Christ is not enough for some people. So I've got a few more comments just to make before we close about the first one. I would like to think in terms of a trilogy. I just noticed as a bit of a movie buff that they seem to like doing trilogies nowadays. So you get one, and then you get the second, you get the third, and then Star Wars goes on for 8, and some go for a whole lot more. So this is my little attempt at trilogy. I'd like to therefore discuss now, and perhaps times in the future as well, what can actually help us to develop our faith. Because some people leave following God through intellectual reasons. I think the bigger reason is the second one. Some don't feel valued. They don't find their place in the congregation. And so they leave for that reason. And the third one, at some point we'll discuss the idea of traumatic distractions. How do we do when our faith doesn't seem to match the trauma that we've had to live through, of whatever kind it is? Now, I have no idea what it's like to have a house burned down. But a lot of people at the moment are asking that question, and a lot of others are asking on their behalf, where is God? That kind of trauma has left a lot of people traumatized. And I can appreciate that. So some of those people need more listening to than answers, but nonetheless. So that's part of my reason as well why I'd like to move into this little slide here. And Richard, I remember we talked about it after I slipped into this briefly in that lesson, but I want to expand it for you now, that faith is based on what we know. As I've already said to you so far, we have the known and the unknown. And now these are 6 things that I've quickly mentioned before in the class, but I'd like to offer to you because I suggest to you these are our responsibility. Right? It's quite possible, in fact, the Holy Spirit can come in and build somebody's faith without them even realizing it. But in most cases, I would submit to you that this next few items here are here for our study, our becoming absorbed in, because there's ground for truth, ground for confidence, ground for faith in each one of those. When I say nature, I'm not suggesting you just look at nature while you're driving past in your car. I'm talking about seeing nature, studying nature. I mentioned an awful figure about how many folk tend to leave the church. Do you know that as a church we also lose about 3/4 of our young people when they go to university? When I say lose, folks, I mean, let me say this in a positive way. For one, I'm a person who applauds whatever a person feels they need to do at that time. And I will affirm them, and I'll encourage them, and I'll stay buddies with them. So I have 2 sons, for example, who no longer see worship or faith, religious faith, as important. I adore my boys. I'll go and hang out with them, I'll do things with them, jump from aeroplanes with them. Going next week to a birthday party for my youngest down in Newcastle. No way in the world am I going to judge them for having chosen to move out of the church. Right? Because if I judge them, what am I doing? I'm only confirming the church is actually an uncomfortable place. When you leave, gosh, you get in trouble. Right? No, I want to love them as my boys, and I'll keep loving them until death. I'd love to see them keep worshiping. They're both high school teachers. They're both really good at what they do. They have so much to offer musically and so on. But while they're doing their journey outside, that's their business. I'm not going to leave them anywhere. But folks, one of the things that builds us up is to be able to understand, because when I said about the 3/4 leaving to go to university, that's partly because the whole culture that surrounds them is evolution. And how do they challenge that when all the language is evolution? My last year at high school, year 12, I studied biology. Did great, loved it. 4 other students used to sit quietly while the lecturer and I would have it on. He often would tell me to be quiet so he could teach his class. But I could not let him get away with the general kind of language they used, because already by then as a kid I'd become a church member, and because my family were Adventists, most of Friday nights and Sabbath afternoons I'd be reading, looking at the stars, making star maps, all that kind of stuff. It really helped me, to be honest, because when I listened to the general language of evolution, and then I try and study, as I said with the little kids this morning, the structure of a giraffe's brain. Why it doesn't blow its head off when it bends down to get water. If you've got a 2-foot big heart pumping blood and you bend your head down, the chances are explosions are going to happen. Unless God has built something into the brain like a massive sponge that absorbs the blood when you go down, and when you stand up it releases the blood so you don't have vertigo. Can you get what I'm getting at? When we see nature and we start looking at it more closely, you will come away, I have no question whatsoever, in a far deeper appreciation and love and respect for God as a creator, because it just does not happen. But if you only look at nature as you're driving by in the car, you may just not get the tremendous value of faith building that is in this particular item that God has provided for us. When you look closely, if ever you get a chance, maybe we have it in the library, I don't know, Heather, if we have it here, but a little DVD series called Creatures That Defy Evolution. Recommend it to you. I think I have it somewhere home in my mess as well. But a great little set where this particular presenter was a leading evolutionist teacher who had to convert to creationism because he said, I couldn't answer it any other way. You have biochemists like Michael Behe, who still will not use the word designer, but as an evolutionist himself, He said, I just can't get past the fact there's such incredible design in nature. So he came up with the term of intelligent design. You can't fluke it, but you'll miss it if you just drive by. That's my point. History, I think, is really, really important too as a gift to us. The very least that I would suggest with history for us is that if we can see that the Bible's history matches secular history, which of course people believe because it's secular and it's in history books, but if you can see a match between the two, that tells you that the Bible was written in real time by real people in real events. And that can increase your confidence as well, particularly when you're sharing with somebody else who might have picked up that the Bible rather is full of fairy tales. Right? I'm not sure if you picked up those who do the senior lesson, but for a long, long time the Bible was criticized because it says Belshazzar was what? The last king of Babylon. Guess what? He wasn't. Nabonidus was. His father. What we don't really know, and this only came out when they found a little clay tablets now in the British Museum, is the fact that Nabonidus decided to go down to a little town, southern part, for recreation, doing his thing, and he left his son as the co-regent. His son was on the chair when in came the Persians. So the Bible was shown, so Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon who got knocked off when they came under the wall. So the history of the Bible and the history of the accepted history of historians once again match. And this again can be a faith builder for you and for anybody you talk to realize in fact that we have something that matches normal history as well. Let's keep moving. I don't have to spend long on this one because we know as a church we have long talked prophecy. We're now doing it in the senior lesson, right? We're reminding ourselves that God has the ability and has seen fit to have it written in record called the Bible for us to be able to look through the future and know what's happened. For us, most of what Daniel predicted was future for him. We now see it's being fulfilled. So what can that do for a person to say, wow, when he actually wrote this, all this stuff was unknown to him. We now look from our perspective and we see it's all being fulfilled. What awesome. So when Jesus therefore says, by the way, I'm going to come again, that's still a prophecy for you and me, isn't it? But when you see the Bible's record on prophecy, then the few remaining ones that are left, there's no reason why we can't have full confidence in those as well, because there are so many other prophecies that God has put in place and we've seen fulfilled in our own personal or in our human history. Can you see where I'm coming from here, folks? Looking for the things that we can know that can build us up. I think reason is another way, another factor we can have. And I'll just put down here how to think. Sometimes it requires a way of thinking and questioning and so on, and how to look at the Bible in a certain way that helps us see that the Bible actually, in fact, is a faith builder. And I just said to you a minute ago, for me, the fact that I probably have more questions now than answers, I'm personally comfortable with that. Because I'm trying to explain, I'm trying to understand a God and a universe and a future that is well beyond my capacities to imagine. It's built my faith to even have more questions because it's so big. Right? But that's another one. Testimony of others, where you find out the stories of other people, in fact, who've walked with God. And we have missionary stories. We have a lot of these kind of stories. They have a library full of books down there, don't we, Heather? Little plug for you, right? Library full of books written by people whose experiences show what God has done in their lives. Even if you're lacking that yourself, which is the last one here, if you say, well, I really can't think of a time when God answers a prayer or whatever. Okay, he doesn't do it for everybody in every single way. That I have discovered, and I don't know why. One of my questions, right? Why do children die? I don't know. I'm going to ask him that because I don't like burying them. My point is this. Other people have had experiences. And while God does not cover every single person in the same way, it's even in the scriptures too. Theologists call it the economy of miracles, where you'll see patches of miracles and then you'll have whole patches. It seems as God's on a holiday. Doesn't seem to be much dramatic going on at all. All right? Same thing as well. Some people have dramatic stories and they can tell you their story. And you'll say, wow, That's encouraging. But you may also find you have some experiences of your own. Be prepared to search for it. Be prepared to ask God for experience as well. Folks, these are only some. I'm sure you can even think of other areas we could go into that may have the hint of helping us build our faith, finding trust in God as a reliable being. My point is that when we have what we know, it can then take us into the unknown with a lot more confidence. I'm not being facetious, but when I found out that, because I was already committed, but when I found out that my first guy had jumped 7,000 times, that was a lot of confidence for me to go into the very unknown at 15,000 feet to jump. Right? And so my confidence in God becomes even stronger if I take the time to look at those areas that are available to me. They're there waiting to be studied. They're waiting to be looked at. They're waiting to be absorbed. So we can say, aha, I don't have to sit here with a big question mark in my head. I might end up still with a little question mark in my head, but I've got a lot more good reasons to say, I'll just wait and see what happens because I know God is trustworthy. So folks, what I'm suggesting here is that the known area that I've just been giving to you is our responsibility. And I use the word intentional study because if you're having a bit of a struggle in some area of your faith/trust, then maybe that's the area you need to focus some of your study on rather than just read anything that comes into your hands. So intentional study is being focused on what the real question is. Or maybe the neighbor has just asked you a question, so you might choose to do some study in order to help that person answer some of their questions. Interaction and conversation that we have, our Sabbath school is one of the best inventions ever. The fact that we get into little groups and we talk about things. It's encouraging also to share questions and somebody else has a thought or an answer. Looking for God, becoming more aware. What I just mentioned to you about nature and history is where you start looking more intentionally also for the evidences of God there, becoming more aware of His presence, rather than just being so busy that you just keep being busy. An attitude of learning. Folks, these are, I believe, my premise is that these are our responsibility. So God, help me to develop an attitude of learning so I want to find out more information, so I can therefore have more build-up for my own personal faith and trust in you. Prayer for guidance. God, I'm putting myself on your mat. I want to be able to become stronger, so help me see the things that I can find out for myself that will then propel me more and more confidently into the unknown. And my simple suggestion to you is that the unknown is God's self-revelation to us through the known and through the Holy Spirit's leading. Remember what Jesus said at one point? If you do all these things, you will not regret it. So I think if we take the approach that it is our responsibility to do some searching for our own knowns, what's available to us, we also will not regret it because God will put us in contact with more details, with more people who can share their story, with more experiences of our own, with a deeper understanding of Himself. That's my last slide. And the importance of that one there, you notice I put that in inverted commas. So folks, if nothing else, I'm encouraging you to think seriously about the fact that if you are having any kind of faith journey that kind of matches some of the stories that are in here, right? Part of it is your responsibility. There are things you can do to actually find that material, that information, that experience that helps you say, I know a bit more now. And my confidence has now just risen a whole lot more because God's revealed Himself to me through what I've just found out and even His own personal experiences. So folks, I sincerely, honestly pray for your blessing in this, for blessing for you, because we don't have to be wandering around. Jesus said, when we know the truth will set us free. So it should also be free from confusion, free from fear, free from simply not knowing. But only you can tell me where you feel you're at and what your needs are. But take some responsibility in that as well. Bless you.